Attention. Attention.
The live broadcast you have tuned into is a pre-recorded episode of the Dudes and Beer podcast. Dudes and Beer is presently traveling the vast void of time and space in an effort to find you more of the best content in the known universe. Enjoy the following transmission, and remember, if you can't be good at it. Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this episode of Dudes and Beer, episode 180 officially, and how auspicious for us to be doing this episode tonight on the anniversary of 9/11. One of the events that really changed my life as far as, it changed everything for a lot of people, but it really changed my eyes as far as the way I viewed things in the world, the way I sourced information, the way that I culled through information. And I think it changed that for a lot of people. It changed a lot of paradigms in the world. And we are here to do that again this evening, folks. We talk about so many important things on Dudes and Beer. All of a few episodes ago, in episode 167, we had a follow-up episode about the Mandalay Bay shooting and new revelations, hidden truths. We had, of course, Michael Cargill, our original guest from the first episode, days after the shooting, when they were still trying to figure out if the man was using bump stocks or not. And then we also had, of course, shooting survivor Shannon Caffey, good friend of mine from Las Vegas. And tonight, we're actually going to be talking to Ramsey Dennison, writer and director of the upcoming documentary Vegas Wrong. I was so lucky after the last episode, for Shannon to hook us up together to do stuff. So following here in just a couple minutes, we will have Ramsey on. But before we do that, let's welcome Matthew McPeak to the show. He is our official Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Commissioner and also host of our Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football podcast. Let's get with him real quick and talk a little bit about the upcoming waiver wire this week for the first official week of NFL action. We'll be right back with you, and we will be right back with Ramsey Dennison, writer and director of Vegas Wrong, a new documentary all about the culture that exists in Vegas, as well as the incident of the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival shooting from Mandalay Bay. Right after this message with Matthew McPeak. We have Matthew McPeak here, the host of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football podcast, as well as the official commissioner for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football League, to come on and talk about our first waiver wire. The NFL officially started its season this last weekend, so we need to find out, those of us like myself who are new to fantasy football, number one, what a waiver wire is, number two, what our commissioner's advice for this week's waiver wire is. So, Matt, lay it down for him, my friend.
All right, so basically a waiver wire is your chance to make your team better every week. You can add players that are on the waiver wire and drop certain players that are on your roster that maybe you're not too happy with. Maybe they're injured, maybe they got suspended, maybe they're underperforming, and there's guys on the waiver wire that have more value than guys that are on your roster. So basically you go in, you put a waiver claim in for a certain player, and you pick a player that you want to drop. You want to target guys that were, obviously in this first week, the waiver wire is just filled with guys that weren't drafted. And there's plenty of guys that should have been drafted that weren't. And on the other side, there's plenty of guys that were drafted by owners that shouldn't have been drafted. So these first couple weeks is when you see a lot of waiver wire movement, a lot of guys that can win you your league. So the waiver wire is definitely important when it comes to fantasy football. definitely got to keep your nose in there and always be looking at, whoever, if somebody drops someone, they're available to you. So, keep your eyes open on the waiver wire. Always be looking for those players to add that can really help your team.
Well, what should people be looking for this week as we enter into week 2 of NFL season 2018?
All right. Well, starting off with probably the most important position in football, maybe not so much for fantasy football, but definitely in real football, is the quarterback position. If you're somebody out there that is in need of a quarterback, you see what Joe Flacco did against the Bills in week 1. Completed 25 of 34 passes, had 236 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He looked great. He looked like a guy that was really trying to come out and say, I deserve to be the starter. This guy that's backing me up, Lamar Jackson, he can wait a little longer. It was against the Bills. Bills looked absolutely atrocious, but Flacco's next game is against Cincinnati, who just gave up 300-plus passing yards to Andrew Luck. So Joe Flacco's not a bad guy to pick up. Another guy that had a big game, Case Keenum. He had 329 passing yards. Yeah, he had 3 interceptions, but he had those 3 touchdowns. He's got the Raiders coming up in week 2, and he's playing at home, so he's not a bad pickup either. And if you're really desperate and you want to try and take advantage of Tyrod Taylor while he's still a starter in the league, he only had 197 passing yards. He had the touchdown with it, but where Tyrod Taylor's value is in his legs. He had 77 rush yards plus the rushing touchdown. So that's about 12, 13 points right there just in the running game for him. And plus, he's got New Orleans next week, who just made Ryan Fitzpatrick look like Joe Namath. So those are the guys at quarterback that you definitely want to target if you're somebody. Maybe you're a guy like you, Chris, who accidentally drafted Eli Manning, and you saw what he looked like against Jacksonville.
Yeah, that was the most horrifying thing in the world. Whenever I got to because I was dealing with my son, and good Lord, I try not to blame my boy on a lot of things, but it was like, really, son? Number one, I randomly.
Like excuses, Chris.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I'm not going to say I don't know football because I don't know a lot about football. However, I do understand the fact that Eli Manning is an old bastard. So he would not have been my first pick. Let's move on to the next position. Go ahead.
Yeah, next is running backs, and this is every week you're probably going to be your number one waiver priority is most likely going to be your running back. So many running backs get injured. So many running backs are moving in and out, and 1 week some guys are getting a lot of carries, and next week they're not getting any. So running back is definitely a key position to look for in the waiver wire. This week with Leonard Fournette going down in week 1 with the hamstring injury, you saw TJ Yeldon come into the game. He got 14 carries. He got 7 targets. Yeah, he only caught 3 of them for 18 yards, but one of them was a receiving touchdown. He had 51 yards on the ground. And, this is, if you go back and you listen to the running back episode of the Dudes of Beer Fantasy Football podcast, you'll hear us do an entire segment on handcuffing, what is handcuffing and why it's important. And this is a perfect example of why you should handcuff your number one running back, and especially if he's a guy like Leonard Fournette that runs with such aggressive nature. And he's just such a strong, huge dude. He wants to run over guys. He's bound to get hurt. He's bound to miss some games. So he's probably number 1 at running back. The next guy I really like is Austin Eckler out in with the Chargers in Los Angeles. He only got 5 carries, but he had 8 yards per carry on those 5 carries. Brought in 40 yards, had 5 catches on 5 targets for 87 yards and a touchdown. He really looked good coming out of the backfield, and this is another one of those handcuffs. If you're the Melvin Gordon owner, get yourself ahead of the curve and go get Austin Eckler, put him at the end of your bench. you're going to get annoyed looking at him at the end of your bench every week because you're never going to want to start him. But the second Melvin Gordon goes down, you're going to be happy that you have him. So he's probably the next guy I would pick up. And another guy that's interesting is Nyheim Hines with the Colts. Another guy, he only got 5 carries, 20 yards, but he got 9 targets and caught 7 of them. So he showed that he can be counted on in the passing game. And to be trusted by Andrew Luck I don't know if there's anything better when it comes to fantasy football. If you can be getting that amount of targets every week, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
We should move on to.
I was going to say, let's go ahead and kind of start wrapping up. What else should people be looking for in our first waiver wire this week for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast?
So, we got receivers and tight ends left, and tight ends is probably the biggest one, especially this week with Delaney Walker going down. He's going to miss the rest of the season, and Greg Olsen has got another foot injury. Hopefully he's not out too many weeks, but it didn't look good. And they're both going to miss, like I said, Delaney Walker's out for the whole season. So you got to go get yourself another tight end. If you're like me and you usually only draft and usually only roster one tight end, you need another tight end. So Eric Ebron with the Colts, he looked great too. 4 catches on 5 targets, had 51 yards and a touchdown. With Andrew Luck healthy, he's got plenty of value as a tight end. George Kittle out in San Francisco, he caught 5 of his 9 targets for 90 yards. Just missed getting that touchdown, which would have made his stat line look even better. And 9 targets is just way too many targets to be leaving on the waiver wire. So if he's available and you need a tight end, go get him. He looked like he was Jimmy Garoppolo's favorite target with Marquise Goodwin out. And the last one here is Benjamin Watson with the Saints. 4 catches, 44 yards. He's one of those older veteran guys that, you're not going to get a huge 9 catch for 120 yards and a touchdown game from him, but a 6 to 8 point floor with good touchdown upside being in that New Orleans offense. And this is his second time around with Drew Brees and the Saints. So he's a good tight end to target too. The last group to talk about is the wide receivers. Had a bunch of guys really, elevate themselves to big relevance. Dorsett over with the Patriots had 7 targets, caught all seven of them, 66 yards with a touchdown. It looked like Brady really trusted him, and that's huge. Not too big on him this week because he's got Jacksonville in week 2. But, if you're looking more for a season-long wide receiver pickup, Dorsett could be huge, especially in these beginning of the season with Edelman out. Chris Godwin down in Tampa Bay. Only had 3 catches for 40 yards, but he got a touchdown. And with Deshaun Jackson in concussion protocol, Goodwin should be the number 2 target in Tampa Bay. Again, another guy with a bad matchup week 2. He's got the Eagles. So again, I don't know if I'd really count on him for this 1 week fill-in, but season long, it's a good pickup. Another guy that should see a lot of more targets is Brandon Marshall with the Seahawks. He had 3 catches for 46 yards and a touchdown. But really his value is going to see a big upswing because of Doug Baldwin's MCL sprain. Doug Baldwin is the focal point of that Seahawks offense. With him gone, those targets got to go somewhere. The Seahawks, ever since they picked up Brandon Marshall this offseason, they've been, super high on him. And he's another one of those veterans that I think the Seahawks are going to count on for a couple of weeks while Baldwin gets healthy. And the last guy is Ted Ginn with the Saints. He caught 5 of his 6 targets for 68 yards and a touchdown, showed he still has that burner speed to get past, corners and safeties and make big plays. And, with Cam Meredith, if he sits out again, because he missed the week 1, if he's out again week 2, Ginn should be the number 3 guy in New Orleans after star running back Calvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, who had a huge game in week 1. So those are 4 receivers that you should look at for the waiver wire in week 2. And so that should wrap it up with the players to target in the waiver wire this week.
Well, and it's been I wouldn't necessarily say an exciting or thrilling first week of football, but there were definitely some like wow moments, like the major injuries, things like that were like, oh my God, this is going to be a game changer out there. So thank you so much for taking the time, not only to host the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football podcast with Adam Natras, as well as being commissioner for the league and being a part of all this. We love having it, Matt. So make sure to tune in, everybody. Thursdays, the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football podcast comes out just before football time. So check that out. And until next time, Matt, if you can't be good at it, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me, and talk to you next week. Good luck, everybody.
And we are back. I would like to welcome to the show a great guy, Ramsey Dennison, writer and director of the documentary Vegas Wrong. How are you doing today, Ramsey?
Well, I'm good, man. I just, I figured you can't go on a show called Dudes and Beer if you don't have a beer in your hand. So
is that what you were rooting for? All right.
Yeah. So I got a ice cold Stella in my hand right now, and I'm drinking it.
Me being on the East Coast right now, I'm having my typical East Coast Yuengling. It's the oldest craft brew in America, oldest brewery in America, and every time I'm on the East Coast, I try to drink stores out of stock. I love it. It's great. So glad to hear that you are having a beverage, because we are about to get into some amazing conversation. We were just having a great conversation about some of the incidents regarding talked about in your documentary, Vegas Wrong, as well as just the culture of Vegas to begin with. Before we really break into the documentary, though, Ramsey, I'd like my audience to learn a little bit about you. How was it that you came to the field of documentary filmmaking, and what was it that made you want to specifically do the documentary Vegas Wrong?
Well, I grew up in Florida, as one of those kids who grew up like making movies. And then when I got older, I moved out to Los Angeles and worked for years as a television editor. I started off on like the show Chris Angel, Mind Freak, and I've worked on shows like Catfish and Naked and Afraid and shows like that. So now interestingly, what happened is in 2013, in August of 2013, I just finished working on a really difficult television show, and I went on vacation in Las Vegas, and I was actually hanging out with a buddy of mine, and we saw 4 LVMPD officers abusing this guy who was in their custody. And, and I don't doubt that this guy had done something wrong and he deserved to be arrested, but I didn't feel that he deserved to be tortured, because instead of like getting this guy in the police car and getting him down to jail, which is what they should have been doing, they were twisting his handcuffs, cutting off his circulation, telling him that his mama raised an F up. Does she know that, son? Does your mama know you're an F up? And I actually looked at my friend and I said, what in the hell is going on here? And oddly enough, that friend had actually been a former SWAT videographer. For years. He'd worked with the LVMPD SWAT team in recording SWAT raids, and his eyes were just popping out of his head. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. This is wrong what they're doing to this guy. And so I actually called 911 and reported it, and I said, you got to get a sergeant or lieutenant down here, because you got 4 LVMPD officers abusing this guy instead of getting him in custody.
Yeah.
And they asked me what kind of clothes I was wearing. I said, white shirt, khaki pants. And I assumed that was so that when the sergeant and lieutenant got there, they could find me and talk to me and get a statement or whatever about this corruption I was seeing. Instead, it appears what happened is that information got relayed to one of the officers. And so all of a sudden I have an LVMPD officer named Mark Bellinger in front of me, and he's going, what are you doing? And I said, well, I've been watching what you're doing. There's nothing right about it. So I called 911 and told him about it. And he says, well, he was furious. He goes, you better out of here or I'm going to have you arrested. And as I was walking away, I said, arrested for what? And next thing you know, I got 3 LVMPD officers on top of me. I'm on the ground. One of them stomps on my head with a boot. Yeah. And one of them says, where are you from? I said, California. He goes, why don't you stay there? And but I didn't really. No, I'm serious. This is what happened. And,
I know. I remember the last documentary. Officers, it was mind-numbing. Mind-numbing, not even mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've seen the film. So my last documentary, What Happened in Vegas, starts off with this encounter, and then I go into these other stories of corruption. And what I discovered is that the LVMPD is a wildly corrupt police department that has a history of making videotapes disappear, lying to the public. And my documentary, What Happened in Vegas, delves into this further. So that's really kind of how I got interested in this. It's just because years ago, before the Vegas mass shooting even happened, it came to my attention that Las Vegas has one of the most corrupt, spoiled, and entitled police departments in America. I mean, this is a police department that pretty much does whatever they want and gets away with it because their useless mayor and their useless district attorney, useless governor, and their useless sheriff don't hold them accountable.
Yeah.
People they answer to are the big money in Vegas, the people who own the casino, the people who get them elected, basically. Mm-hmm. And so it's, Vegas really is, when people hear Las Vegas, they don't exactly think wholesome, but the place is actually even more corrupt than people can imagine. And we saw that on full display with the Vegas mass shooting. And that's what my next documentary, Vegas Wrong, is going to be going into.
Well, and, it's interesting that you say that because moving from one into the other here and shifting focus in what happened in Vegas, because you touch on some of the shooting in that. But in that, it's revealed that, and this goes to show the extent of the corruption, and not just corruption, but connection between the casinos and the sheriff's department. It's the fact that on the high roller floors, there is a separate security line that whenever you call up and ask for security, you don't get the main front desk. It gets transferred to somebody else. It doesn't go to 911 when you call 911 from a high roller room. It goes to a private line, and then they call the sheriff's department.
That's because they want to protect their high rollers.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, not a high roller who pops into Vegas is behaving himself, and if a hooker gets smacked up in the room or the guy's doing some blow and screws something up, they want to make sure that guy's not. Because as soon as you call
Pink Floyd on the hotel room,
Yeah. As soon as you call 911, it's public record, right? And so that's why you have these back lines. And basically, sadly, if you're a high roller, you can basically blow into Vegas and do whatever you want. And the casinos who only care about making money off you are going to protect you. And that was the case with MGM and Mandalay Bay.
Well, and let's start getting into that real quick. Let's kind of move through the story a little. I don't want you to give away a lot of the juice, but let's get into some of the facts because where things have gone between the release of your last film and this one have been absolutely wild. The last episode that we had Shannon Ray on was 167. We're now on 180. And since then, there has been the next week after that episode was the sheriff's election. The incumbent sheriff, the crazy crooked guy, ended up getting elected again. And that was where we left the episode, was the election's coming up and we're hoping he's going to be ousted. And I was like, man, I pray so. I hope so. But it is hard to unseat an incumbent, especially when you're talking locally. Because when you're at least within a federal race, most people don't have an idea who the hell their representative is. But when you're talking about city council, your sheriff, things like that, people know those names, and it's hard to unseat that even with money, much less the disparate difference between a $250,000 budget and a $50,000 budget that they had for the election.
It was actually over $500,000.
Yeah.
So Joe Lombardo, because he protects these casinos and looks out for their interests, he raised over $500,000 for his campaign. His nearest competitor raised around $50,000.
Yeah.
So he had more than 10 times the money, which buys 10 times the ad. And even though most people in Vegas know that Joe Lombardo is a worthless, stupid ass prick who protects the casinos, for whatever reason, if his face is on those commercials or whatever, people vote with what they know.
Yeah.
And sadly, the people voted this corrupt liar who's been proven to be a liar back. And it is astounding that you can be a morally bankrupt scumbag and win an election because of money. But that's where we're at in the United States right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I could not agree more. We talk about that on this show all the time. The fact that we need to change the way we look at things. We need to change the way that we process the world around us, because if we don't,
we'll do the right thing for the right reason, and it's as simple as that.
We're going to be led down a horrible, horrible road by the nose ring very rapidly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's going to be like, come here, bull, and we'll be bucking, trying not to do it, but there ain't no choice. You're going where that nose ring's being pulled, folks. That's how you control a bucking bull. And that is exactly what we're seeing in our country right now. That is exactly what's going on, and it's a boiling pot. And things like the Vegas massacre, it still blows my mind. It boggles my mind that they closed the case with no motive.
Right.
No motive.
Right, with no motive. And you know damn good and well Joe Lombardo knows what the motive is. But again, this shows how
dude shot over 50 people. Dude shot over 50 people.
He answers to the casinos. And based on what I've learned and what we reveal in Vegas wrong, this guy knows what the motive is. Joe Lombardo. And so, again, him standing up there and saying he doesn't know what the motive is yet another bold-faced lie from a liar.
Yeah, my stomach turned when I saw that.
Stephen Paddock hated the casinos, and he wanted to get revenge on them. And for whatever reason, those casinos don't want him saying that's the motive, possibly because they're worried about copycat crime, or I don't know what the reason is, but that's why. Because Joe Lombardo, even in earlier interviews, he came out and said that basically, the guy had lost some money, Stephen Paddock had lost a lot of money from gambling, and he kind of hinted that could be the motive, but for whatever reason, he's on a rope with them. The casinos who are holding him like the puppet that he is don't want him to formally reveal that as a motive.
Sure.
And we're going to dive into that more in Vegas wrong.
Because what are you going to do? Like, let the average gambler know that, like, yeah, we're perfectly willing to almost bankrupt somebody. We're perfectly willing to let you come in and dump $100,000, and then we'll give you a $50,000 marker. Do you really want the general public to know that, and that's how you treat, like, this one slice of people? Right. And not a lot of people know this. You remember Hall of Fame linebacker Junior Seau? Uh-huh.
Now, I know this may seem like turning the completely different subject, but not a lot of people know the circumstances leading up to his suicide. And it's an interesting story. He actually went to gamble, and he was staying, because Junior Seau, this is a Hall of Fame NFLer. They put him up in the high, expensive suite and all this stuff. He rolls into Vegas with his buddy, and wins I think it was, I'm not positive of this, but a high amount of money. I think it was over $1 million.
Yeah, it was into the numerous zeros.
Yeah. Okay. And so his buddy was just like, hey man, you won. You did it. Like, let's just chill out, watch a movie, stay in this sweet, nice hot tub or whatever and chill out. Instead, what that casino did is send their little scumbag host up to entice Junior to do more gambling. And it worked. And not only did he lose that money, he actually went $1 million in the hole.
Yep.
And then of course you're talking about a professional athlete. He's going to be competitive. And so he takes out another $1 million to try to win that $1 million back. And he ends up the trip hugely in the hole. And, and so what really is that? You're talking about casinos that only care about money. And the only reason we even know this story is because Junior Seau's friend was bold enough to come out with it, even though, there's some powerful people in Vegas who could have punished him for putting this story out there, but it's the truth.
And many people trying to say, no, that wasn't the circumstance.
And in these casinos, they may smile at you. They may give you comps. They may treat you like you're special or whatever. But all they really want to do is take the money from your pocket and put in theirs.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, and Stephen Paddock had lost a lot of his money and was angry about it and wanted to get revenge on the casinos. And that is the storyline that Vegas doesn't want you to know about. And that's why Joe Lombardo revealed a motive, is because Puppet Boy, who's being pulled by the casinos, that's what he is. He's a puppet boy.
Just call him Pinocchio. Just call him Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Nothing but strings and a nose that grows when you lie.
Yeah. Dude, it's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah.
He's not an articulate guy.
No.
He's not a particularly good liar, because you can see it when he's lying.
Whenever the first press conferences were going on, that timeline changed every single time he got up there. Every single time he got up there, that story changed, the timeline changed.
He's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he does know how to listen to orders, and it's clear who he's getting his orders from, and that's the big money in Vegas. But the good news here is that I don't think most of the country buys it. This guy Pinocchio, Lombardo, thinks that he can just shove lies down your throat and that you're going to do it because he's an officer of the law. The problem is he's been caught lying, and see, this isn't just my take on Lombardo. The thing that people don't understand is, if you talk to officers of the LVMPD, and this is a department that has some good officers in them, you talk to retired cops, you talk to anybody who really knows what's going on in that department, you ask them what they think of Joe Lombardo, you get this pregnant pause, and then they just kind of like deflect the question.
Yeah.
Because they know, because they hate him. Okay. Yeah. And anybody who doubts that, just try it out for yourself. Next time you're in Vegas, if you're casually talking with a cop or whatever, ask them what they think of Joe Lombardo. Yeah. Look at the pause and the embarrassed silence, and that will tell you, and talk and listen to them talk about no comment or whatever. So that tells you all you need to know about what his fellow officers think of his integrity, which is non-existent.
Yeah.
And, so he's a bad guy with bad motives to protect the big money. The good news is we live in America, and there's this thing called freedom of speech, and we're going to be exposing that in Vegas wrong, if I'm still alive then.
And that's one reason why I want to do this, because you never know what happens with things. And the last thing I want is for you to get casinoed and end up in a hole out in the desert. You know what I mean?
That's happening. Nowhere to look. And they trick back to Vegas, but anyway.
But
so I like to put that out
there
in case something does happen.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, a situation almost like that just happened to your production team. Your associate producer was just arrested.
Yeah. So Steven Stubbs is a good friend of mine. He's an attorney, and he was our associate producer on What Happened in Vegas, my last documentary. And Steven is always fighting for what's right. I mean, he's one of those guys in Vegas battling the forces of evil. He's one of the good guys. And he was actually advising his client not to speak to the police. He showed up on scene because, see, the thing that police will try to picky with you, and they'll try to get information out of you that you don't actually have to give them. People don't understand, if you're not you don't have to talk to the police if you don't want to. That's what you have the right to me.
That's called an interrogation.
Right. And so Steven showed up on scene and said, advised his client not to speak to the police, and the police didn't like that. And so they arrested him. And it's outrageous, but this is what the LVMPD does. They don't care about the Constitution. They don't care about the law. They basically do whatever they want and get away with it because the DAs, the mayor, the governor, everybody in Vegas is, not, how do I put this? They don't care about doing what's right. They cover up for each other. They protect each other, and they all bow to the big money. And so you have a city of Las Vegas that is just, when you hear Las Vegas, you don't exactly think like morals and wholesomeness, but the truth is it's worse than people can even imagine.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you have, your district attorney is this guy named Steve Wolfson. This guy, before he was the DA, he was a lawyer. He tried to try a case in front of his wife.
Who is a sitting
Jackie
judge.
Glass. Yeah, so you have an attorney who tries to try a case in front of you think bias might enter the equation?
No conflict of interest.
Of
interest whatsoever.
Former city councilman Miller, who called him out on it, and she got in trouble. But and now this scumbag is the DA. So when you have people like that, like Steve Wilson in office, this is the kind of pretty much the LVMPD does whatever they want and they get away with it because the scumbag politicians in that city who answer to the big money don't hold anybody accountable. They're all part of this circle jerk, looking out for each other, and they all get grilled by the casinos to protect the big interests. And one of the things Vegas Wrong will be exposing is that this is one of the reasons why we're not being told the truth in the Vegas mass shooting is because of scumbag politicians like Steve Wilson, their scumbag mayor Carolyn Goodman, their scumbag governor and scumbag sheriff who don't care about anything other than protect the big money
and getting back to business as usual.
Yeah, exactly. Get the registers ringing. That's all they care about. They don't care about doing what's right.
Yeah. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, even that.
Yeah. Well, that's what they mass shooting. They tried to, and sadly, it pretty much worked. When they use their influence.
And that's what I was telling Shannon was that in episode 167 was the fact that, dude, you don't get it. Every stitch of news I have gotten since our first episode about the shooting and since me having you on in Vegas has been from you. I don't see it. And I follow news feeds, my friend. I worked in live news and stuff like that. Like, I am a news hound.
Right.
That's what I do.
That's not an accident.
No, exactly.
A lot of people don't know that Vegas has something called the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority.
Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So when you go to Vegas and you pay that resort fee, it's quite a bit of money. It's like anywhere from $25, $45 a night. Okay. You have over 40 million visitors a year in Vegas paying this hefty resort fee. You know where that money goes? It goes to advertise Vegas.
Yeah.
And the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authorities is in charge of, they're the ones who created what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And they're the ones who spend literally hundreds of millions a year advertising, come to Vegas and have a good time. You're going to come to the Bellagio. You're going to win a bunch of, you see these ads and you get the impression that you're just going to roll into the Bellagio, and walk out with $50,000 and 2 hot blondes under your arm. But the reality is you're probably going to walk out broke with your dumpy ass wife.
Yeah. Like,
Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, they're the ones who spend hundreds of millions a year advertising, like, come to Vegas. And one of the things we're exploring in Vegas Wrong is this organization one of the reasons why we're not getting the truth? Did they use their influence in the media to, if you're spending hundreds of millions a year in advertising, can you go to these stations and say, hey, listen, we spent millions in advertising this year. We'd appreciate it if you'd lay off the Vegas mass shooting story. Now, we're exploring in Vegas Wrong if that happened, and if that's the reason why this story went away.
Here's just a newsy question for you. Did you actively, and I'm sure you did. I can't wait. God, I can't wait to see this movie, man. I've been so anxious to see this movie. And I want to have you back on when the movie comes out. But did you actively go talk to their PRO, their public relations officer?
You talking about the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority?
Yeah.
Or actually, I didn't. And I'll tell you why I didn't.
Okay.
Because I already know what's going to happen.
All right.
With what happened in Vegas, our film, we actually had 3 Vegas theaters that wanted to play the movie back out of playing the movie.
Yep.
So when the movie started winning awards and getting attention and all this stuff, we actually had people reach out to us who wanted to book the movie, and one of them was the Eclipse Theaters. And then last email I ever got from the lady who wanted to book it at Eclipse Theaters was, the LVMPD stopped by today. Suddenly I couldn't get Ruth Jen from Eclipse Theaters, the woman who wanted to book the film, on the phone.
And I remember posting that story whenever you put it up, talking about it, whenever you shared it, because it was like, look at this. Like, they won't even – he had the arrangements made, and then they canceled his shit.
Yeah. The news did a story. Fox News and did a story how the Fox 5 rather in Vegas did a story on how the Eclipse Theaters was, were they intimidated out of backing out of this movie? But so basically what's going on is they try to ignore people. They try to ignore things away. And I'm quite certain that I'm on their radar and that's what they're doing with me. So I didn't really waste my time reaching out to talk to them, because frankly, and there was a good reason for that, I wanted to stay off the radar. Because, if you're rolling into Vegas, you're rolling around town, I was worried about getting pulled over and all of a sudden, oh, what's this? Is that cocaine in your pocket? And people may think that's paranoid, but anybody who knows a thing or two about the LVMPD, one of the most corrupt police departments in America, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, this is one of the most corrupt police departments in America. And, this is a police department that's currently under investigation for having their vice squad protecting a pimp.
Yeah, get into that. We were talking about that pre-show because that was just a mind number. I was like, oh my Jesus, what the hell is that? Are you serious?
No, so the LVMPD, there was a vice detective named Chris Bauman, and he was a very self-righteous individual who liked to go on national TV and call himself the pimp hunter. And he wrote books about, hunting down pimps in Vegas and did all this. About how great okay. But then what ended up happening was there's a pimp named Molly Mall. And this guy is a big time pimp. He owns escort agencies and he's also a record producer. This guy has produced for like Justin Bieber or I don't know if he's produced for Justin Bieber, but Justin Bieber was at his house and this vice detective, / scumbag, Chris Bauman, actually took his kid to visit Justin Bieber and couldn't help but brag about it at work at the LVMPD. Oh, yeah. He took his fucking kid to this house to meet Justin Bieber. And then, so that was kind of the beginning of these and so what's coming out now, and there's an FBI probe about this, it's under investigation by the FBI, and is that, Chris Bauman and some other people in that vice squad were allegedly protecting this pimp, Molly Mall, and actually accepting cash payments from him to like drive away the competition. So they arrested rival pimps like this guy, Ocean Fleming. And now it looks like this guy, Fleming's going to be let out of jail or prison because of this investigation. So this is how dirty this police department is.
Because of the police racketeering stuff.
Right. I mean, this is, there's good officers in this department, but the proportion, the number of bad, corrupt officers in this department is staggering. The second in command, Under Sheriff Kevin McMahill, this guy is a guy early in his career was part of a squad that found a woman with drugs on her and told her that they'd let her off if she showed them her vagina. Okay. So and there was a female officer who reported this, one of the good officers, and he ended up getting there's a cash payout and he had to leave the LVMPD, but then he came back and now he's second in command.
Oh, wow.
The under sheriff. And so, that tells you all you need to know. And the second most powerful person in the department is willing to let somebody off for showing their vagina. Like that tells you all you need to know about what corruption does in that department. And sadly, that's rise to the top. And Joe Lombardo is the perfect example of that. Casino puppet boy.
He is the cheese of the cream, folks. Let's put it that, or butter of the cream, rather. That's how thick and at the top he is. It's absolutely crazy how far this story goes in and of itself. Right. So many moving parts to it. Let's get back into a little bit of Stephen Paddock, things like that.
Right. Okay. Well, Stephen Paddock was, by all accounts, a really unusual guy to do this. This guy had been a millionaire, mild-mannered accountant. I have people who are close to the family who say that he's the kind of guy who never raised his voice. He was, he wasn't anybody. He'd be the last person in the world that you would suspect would do something like this. And even I was listening to an interview last night, and Steve Wynn, because Paddock spent a lot of time in Wynn's casino, and Wynn was saying the same thing, that all his employees said never would have expected this mild-mannered guy who, according to Wynn, never even drank alcohol, would do something like this.
Well, a couple of the interesting facts I found were the fact that he called his mother, and just had a casual conversation. It wasn't like, "Bye, Ma, how you?" There wasn't any kind of inkling toward anything. And even his brother came out and was like, he is not like politically involved. Like he doesn't toe a party line one way or the other. He's not religiously inclined in any way. Like there.
It appears that the only thing that he was really into was just kind of gambling.
Yeah.
Now he had been a pilot. People had said like one of his great joys in life was flying, and one of the things I learned while researching him is that when he was no longer able to fly because of health reasons, that kind of drove him into a depression. That's when the gambling started to hit really hard.
I can see that.
But I'm not saying at all that Stephen Paddock was any kind of a great guy.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe he was.
And he actually was he was a contractor as well. Was it not Northrop Grumman?
I know. He was an accountant. He was
okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I know he somehow had big connections with major military contract, which that came out fairly early in investigation.
They had rental properties, and so but he was a pretty prosperous individual. He had money, and I mean, I actually drove. We drove to his house in Mesquite, Nevada, and filmed it. It's a really nice place. I mean, it was a nice neighborhood. There's a golf course on the neighborhood, and as soon as we turned the camera on, one of his neighbors just stomped out and got in our face and said, we have a right to privacy, and I'm gonna call up the police.
Get out of my camera shot.
And I kind of said, oh, okay, yeah, call the police and tell them to come arrest somebody who's not breaking any law, because obviously we weren't on anybody's property. You can film from a public street.
Absolutely, you can.
That's the thing is, people who aren't terribly bright think they can just say to you, "Oh, I'm going to call the police," and that you'll run away. But I filmed Paddock's house, and my point is just it was a really nice house on a golf course, and I mean, geez, it didn't. That's not something you see a lot with these mass shooters.
Yeah, it wasn't a ramshackle shack. It wasn't like a Unabomber shack, something like that. It wasn't a place that looked like a bunker. It's not like a 2-bedroom apartment where one of them has an electronics workbench full of detonation equipment.
I fly through the window because the golf course is literally right behind his house. I mean, and so that's something you haven't really seen before, is somebody this prosperous doing something like this. But so Vegas Wrong really delves into Paddock and why he did this, or if he did it. The movie's as much about why we're not getting the truth is what the truth is, and why we're not getting it is because basically everybody in Vegas only cares about money. They don't care about doing what's right. They don't care about the truth. They care about money. And they understand that this story is getting in the way of the registers ringing, and that's why they did everything they can to make the story go away. And Vegas Wrong is going to expose.
That's why they've held back the Survivors Fund, all that stuff. Like there's money that people like Shannon and stuff like that who were injured, the families of the dead, things like that are supposed to get their settlement, supposed to get the money for their injuries, things like that, and totally been held back.
When we were doing the last shoot for Vegas Wrong, I checked in with some of the survivors, and they were just now getting their funds. There's one woman I interviewed who was she did hair for a living, and so she injured her hand and she couldn't do hair for months. Yeah. And it was, this happened in October. It was like August before I think they have something called the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center. Yeah. And she went there, and she was filling out paperwork in August to get reimbursed for lost funds or whatever. But so what happened with this is basically the scumbag politicians of Vegas never miss a chance for a photo op, particularly a national photo op. Yeah. And so when the whole eyes of the world were on Vegas, you had Steve Sisolak, who's running for governor, very publicly starting, rallying behind this Vegas Strong Fund. And I actually showed up and filmed some things, and he was there just glad handing everybody and Vegas Strong this and that. And as soon as the cameras were off, he was like out of there. You know, just zoom like the road runner. Just
I gotta go.
You have to ask yourself, like, was Vegas Strong? And that's why we call the movie Vegas Wrong. Was it really about helping the victims who, many of have never even gotten that Vegas Strong money? Or was it about helping themselves? Was it about people like Steve Sisolak helping themselves? And I think it was. I think he, and this guy, Steve Sisolak, this guy's a city councilman running for governor. And you look in a lot of the press conferences and you see him, he's the silver-haired guy in the back. And you ask yourself, what the hell is this guy doing here? Well, what he's doing there is getting himself national face time so he can be the next governor, and very publicly supporting Vegas Strong. But he doesn't appear to care too much about the money actually getting to the victims, because I've interviewed a lot of them who haven't seen any. And they're, so it's just a scumbag parade in this town when you're talking about Vegas politicians. I mean, they're really,
we really saw that on a national level on this anniversary, on 9/11. Whenever the 9/11 Victims Fund came around, people that were abusing it, people that were trying to get money out of it, who didn't have people that were dead. Good God, how many 9/11 commemorative commercials did we have? Where it's like, buy these beautiful crystal towers. It was like, what are you shooting me right now? Did y'all? Yeah, exactly. The commemorative coin, and it was like stamped out of 99.9 silver. It's like,
okay. Well, if it's worth $295, then why are you selling it for $29.99?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe because it's not worth that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same idea.
Why don't you sell it for $300 and give them? You keep the 30 and give them $270.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about that, like where the money really went, and was this, in the film Explorers. And see, the interesting thing about Steve Sisolak was actually 3 or 4 years ago, he was the biggest opponent of the police department. This was a guy who called out the sheriff, Doug Gillespie, that was before Lombardo got in office, for like colluding with the union. He basically called him out to the point where the sheriff, Doug Gillespie, like went out in front of the LVMPD headquarters. You might even remember this from what happened in Vegas. We have that scene, and he says, "I'm offended," So he was talking about Steve Sisolak. So, 4 or 5 years ago, Steve Sisolak was like the biggest enemy of the police department. And now he's like glad handing Lombardo and kissing ass and making sure that his face is on national television and supposedly being the ambassador of Vegas Strong, when it appears that all it's really about is him getting face time and trying to help himself get elected governor. So, I mean, in my opinion, that's what Steve Sisolak's really about. And we're going to be exposing that in Vegas Wrong too. If you want to be a scumbag, the problem with that is sometimes somebody might come along and expose you for it. So I have that to look to, Sisolak.
Yeah. Get some of that. It's interesting because since the beginning, since shortly after the shooting, there have been so many theories about why he was shooting. There were stories of bullet holes being found in airline fuel tankers over near McCarran Airport, and perhaps the fact that he was trying to blow those up or something like that. And when that didn't happen, he turned the gun on the crowd. All kinds of things. To the fact that there were possibly multiple shooters at the event, and even what y'all covered in what happened in Vegas, which is the fact that there is a separate line to the sheriff's office, and that got called. And then when the shooting started happening and people called 911, that is what caused the 20-minute lag in communication. was the fact that the sheriff's office had this thing. Hey, okay, yeah, a gun went off on the high roller floor. All right, Mr. Vegas hallway security guy, and we'll come deal with it in a little while. Don't worry about it. He's not shooting at you anymore. And then next thing you know, he's shooting at people at the window, and when people call 911, they can't figure out where he's shooting from. And it took them almost 20 minutes to figure things out.
I've spent the last week looking at literally all of the body cam footage from that night, because we're incorporating it into the film Vegas Wrong. What I saw, I mean, I just want to make myself clear, like, there were a lot of LVMPD officers who were doing everything they could to help that night, and there were good officers who did help, and they were just kind of figuring it out. And a lot of them I don't think can really be faulted for that. They were on the ground and they're trying to figure it out. But the question is really why it took so long to get, 70 minutes to get the officers up to the room,
Yeah.
And it appears that there was a huge communication breakdown that night, and that appears to be one of the things they're trying to hide. And will be, and to be honest with you, I have some information about that that is really, really damning. And we're going to be including that in Vegas Wrong, but I have to verify it further. I actually just recently learned it a couple days ago. As long as any hitmen don't show up at my door, you'll be able to shoot it. So that's something that's breaking right now. Here in September, we're actually incorporating some new information into the film right now about why there was a communication breakdown that night. And it also appears to be the real reason that the LVMPD is covering this up, because it's bad, and it's a pattern of corruption, and something that it appears that they've made a habit of doing.
Yeah. And I definitely, number one, I don't want you to give away the juice of your film. And number two, I really don't want you to put it out there without it being verified. That's just the newsy in me.
Yeah, exactly. So
and also for your own protection, I don't want you making aspersions. I mean, good God, you've already been on the hit parade of the LVPD, so.
Yeah, no, I imagine, if they have a hit list, it's I'm probably at the tippy top of it.
Yeah, I'm sure that you would be up there.
Right. But I mean, the truth is, I don't hate police. I don't even hate the MPD, because I understand that there's, a lot of good officers in that department. The problem isn't that most officers in that department are bad. The problem is the ones who are get away with it because it's a department run by bad officers. Joe Lombardo's corrupt, or Sheriff Kevin McMahill is corrupt. So when you have corruption at the top, you're going to have a lot of untruthfulness. And that's what happened in the Vegas mass shooting, is that you have a department run by liars lying. And pretty much getting called out for it. And so then they shut it down,
Now, you've mentioned the fact of using a lot of body cam footage from that night. There has been a lot that's been released here in the last few months. Let's go through some of that for our audience here, because not everybody is in deep as you are with this story, of course. And a lot of them are definitely not complete news heads like me, where they're looking at RSS news feeds every 15, 20 minutes, to catch the latest and greatest of what's going on around the country and the world. So let's go.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you know, Sheriff Joe Lombardo tried to obstruct the release of the body cam videos. Him and his lying lawyers came up with every excuse in the book. He even tried to charge the press almost $500,000 to release public information, public documents.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what 911 calls. That's what body cam footage are.
They are actively under no less than 6 lawsuits from news organizations for suppression of truth.
Right. And so it took news organizations suing them to release that. And, having spent the last week going through that footage, I'll tell you there's a lot of questionable things in it. And there's sections of it where there's no sound, and then the sound comes back on again. And there's also multiple things where where officers are instructed to turn their video cameras off. You know, there's this one where they're by I think it's the Southwest Area Command. It isn't too far from Mandalay Bay, and there's like a strike team getting ready to go, and this woman's marching around saying cameras off, cameras off, cameras off, and everyone's saying yeah, but apparently one person didn't remember to turn the camera off, so that's why we have that footage. But there's also things where, you know, one of the guys doing the breach just goes, "I'm going to turn this camera off now." You know, like he says that, and then then the footage just goes off. So it's clear they're hiding something. And you know, I mean, I was, to be honest with you, when I was going through this footage, I was just like, how did they let this get to me? You know, because here's the crazy part. Like, so when the judge, the court actually called them on their BS. The court basically said, listen, you guys are stalling. Just release the footage. Like, we're not buying this crap. Release the footage.
Yeah.
Joe Lombardo, and what a lot of people don't understand what's going on is Joe Lombardo had an election coming up in June. So he was stalling this controversial footage to make sure that the stuff that made him look bad, made his officers look bad, didn't come out until after he was reelected. And then once he's reelected, all this video, all this stuff comes out, like where you even have one of the LVMPD officers saying that he thinks there's a multiple shooter. You have officers like being cowards in the hallways when they could have stopped Paddock, all this stuff. But a lot of it's kind of flown under the radar because the tremendous power that Vegas has with the media and their ability to shut stories down. And that's what we're exploring in Vegas Wrong. And actually my last documentary, What Happened in Vegas, went into it as well, but not to the extent that this is.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see how in-depth you get into it, because it was interesting. Before the last episode, Shannon sent me the link to What Happened in Vegas, and he was like, you should really check this out. It's got some good stuff. And it was probably about the last maybe third to quarter of the film that was really about the Mandalay Bay incident and Stephen Paddock.
That's
right. The rest of it was really more setting the scene of the mentality of the Vegas Police Department, the methodology of the Vegas Police Department, the fact that it's like, oh, you know what? Here's a guy that's utterly innocent that happens to have the same name as a dude a few states away that's a pretty major drug dealer. Let's just go shoot him.
Yeah, Trevon Cole, right.
Yeah, let's just break into his house and shoot him the day before his baby's
born.
And
then let's lie about it and cover it up.
Yeah.
And let's have that guy employed by the police union and make over $100,000 a year, even though he killed somebody who
exactly
didn't really do anything.
And you hear a lot,
and it's just like astounding.
You hear a lot, especially in our modern society, about the blue wall. The brotherhood of blue, police protecting police, race aside, and it is an odd culture. It is a different culture. And like you said, I'm one that is not given to hate cops. Most of the time when I see one in the grocery store, the corner store, much like anybody in military uniform, I thank them for their service. They've got a pretty thankless job, the ones that are out there doing good things. There are cops that stop and play football with kids. I don't know if
they have a thankless job. I mean, if you think about it, like everybody's always thanking them for their service. They signed up for it.
Sure.
They knew what they were.
It's the fact of like them firefighters, EMTs, they get paid less than teachers sometimes.
Well, police, not in Nevada. I mean, those guys start like 70,000 a year. And most of the administrators make up to like, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, they're in the hundreds of thousands a year. So that's what you have in Nevada is just they stack the deck. They've just been like, they pay themselves a lot. They lie.
Yeah.
And
you're much more willing to protect yourself than somebody else at that amount of money a year.
Yeah. So that's really what you have in Nevada is just unchecked power. And it's really kind of a theory of, the LVMPD is what happens to a police department when there's zero accountability. The LVMPD is what happens when the DAs don't care about justice and only care about themselves. When the mayor doesn't care about justice, and they just get a pass on everything. You end up with a police department that kills people they don't need to kill, that lies when they don't need to lie, and covers up mass shootings when they don't need to cover it up. You know.
Well, and there was actually just a story all of last week about a woman that died that was found dead. It may have been sooner than last week, where a woman was found dead in the Vegas jail hours after she was found unresponsive.
Yeah.
Like they went in, they checked on her. She didn't respond, nothing like that. They didn't check her pulse. They didn't put a mirror in front of her face. She was found like 5 hours later, dead as a doornail.
Well, I'll just, one tip I can give people is, Vegas is obviously a place where people can go and have fun.
Behave yourself in Vegas.
Don't have 20 beers and go out and do something crazy in that town, because that police department is, they're known for
not just that.
And making videos disappear. So you gotta really watch yourself in Vegas.
Well, and there is definitely a shady underbelly to Vegas. There's a lot of hustlers. There's a lot of prostitutes. There's a lot of people willing to take you for your money on the street. We were talking about it before the show. The fact that Bugsy Siegel was really the one that started Vegas as we know it.
Right.
And it was all mob and mafia money, but at least you knew that those criminals were a different class of people. And they were the fact, much like their streets in Chicago, or much like any street in New Jersey or New York controlled by the mob or the mafioso, the Cosa Nostra, as it might be called. Any blood spilt on their street will be spilled by them.
See, here's the thing about, the old school mob, and you'll hear a lot of, if you talk to people.
They didn't harm civilians.
They pretty much, if you don't mess with them, they don't have a problem with you.
Yeah.
It's, a lot of the people that got killed by the mob is because they lied, didn't repay money. And I'm not saying that condones like killing somebody, but
absolutely not.
It's not like the mob runs around killing random people. Anybody who knows anything about the mob knows that, they can actually be pretty charming people, and they're also very generous people.
Yeah.
And so when the mob ran Vegas, I don't know about you. I mean, I had a couple Italian buddies growing up, and not to put all Italians in there with the mob, but you go to an Italian,
absolutely,
they're going to feed you really well. They're going to, they're very hospitable people. And so when Vegas was run by the mob, they were just far more generous,
That's what I'm saying. It was a different class of criminal.
You could get a free room. You could get tickets to a show. You could do, and now it's like they have like mathematical formulas for comping you. So it's like, no, this man, there's not $5,000 worth of handle on his bets from the last day, so we're not going to comp him an orange juice or whatever. It's like, so it's become kind of cold corporate mob. And so now that it's run by corporations, a lot of people will tell you Vegas is actually a worse place than it used to be. It's a place where you get ripped off. It's a place where you pay $11 for a beer.
It's funny. I fly around the country to do AV work, and I actually have movies timed to places that I fly frequently. And the one movie that I watch every time I fly from Austin to Vegas is the movie Casino, because from the time you start taxiing to the time you land at McCarran, it is like from the time the movie starts to the time the credits start to roll.
What is it, about 2.5 hours?
Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, that's cool. But that is literally where the movie wraps, is the fact of, it went from this to now they've torn down the old Vegas. They've torn down the age of the comp. And now you're looking at whales. You're looking at not giving anybody a comp unless you're spending $100,000 a weekend. You're looking at the fact that casinos are now owned by hedge funds, all that kind of stuff. It's a totally different kind of criminal that's doing stuff. And like I said before,
at least touches is entertaining.
Yeah, at least when you're talking about the mafia, you understand. Like I said, they aren't going to have blood spilt on their street unless they're the ones that spill it. They aren't going to go out and hurt civilians. They aren't going to let that happen.
The mob ran Vegas. People would tell you that it was actually a pretty safe place because they didn't allow street crime.
Exactly.
And that stuff came later in the 70s.
Yeah. You could deal drugs underhand all you want, but don't be killing nobody over it.
Well, I've talked to people who lived in Vegas their whole life, like 70-year-old guys, and they told me that in the old days, you'd walk in and the people knew your name.
Yep.
There was a warmth, and and they knew how to take care of you, and that's one thing you don't really see with the corporate Vegas. Is it's just a very cold. It's all about mathematical formulas and $45 resort fees and $11 beers. And I mean, let's be real. Like, the place kind of sucks now.
It's definitely the tourist trap now.
Well, it isn't what it, see, I remember the first time I went to Vegas was in 2004. And I remember the very first thing I ever saw in that town. I went to a 7-Eleven to get a cup of coffee just right off the freeway. And I saw this girl outside of the 7-Eleven just bawling her eyes out, mascara run down her cheek. She had like, a duffel bag with her, and it looked like, someone had just like beat the crap out of her and thrown her out. And it was just like, and I had no idea at the time, I just went inside the 7-Eleven and bought a coffee and didn't think much of it, but I had no idea at the time that's really a metaphor for Vegas,
Yeah.
And the first thing I ever saw in that town really is what that town is. It's a town that chews people up and spits them out.
Yeah.
And I think and it was much later that I became fascinated by that idea, but I think that's what Vegas is it's very seductive and it's also a con because those casinos are paying that $300,000 light bill with money that people use,
Oh, yeah.
And so it's, but it's a fact,
I worked at a casino, in Louisiana. I worked at Grand Casino Coushatta as a barback for a while. And like I was telling you before the show, they start you off in the graveyard shift. And there's like, after studying subliminal psychology in college, things like that, I understand a lot of how the casino industry works and how they prey on your mentality. They keep you barraged by noise and lights to mentally wear you down. Like, that's the same thing that like we did to the Branch Davidians. That's the same thing that we did to Noriega. Like, it mentally breaks down your facility to defend yourself and to have rational thought. And then they pump you full of free drinks. And, they used to put up, it's a big rumor that they used to put oxygen in the air to just kind of make you more euphoric. Oh,
I've heard that many times. I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah. Whether it be true or not, the fact is, much like there's something called the cooling threshold, which is what changed the computer industry. It's the fact that whenever you do something, if it's less than 30 milliseconds before that action happens, like if you click a mouse, if that action on your computer doesn't happen within like a third of a second, your brain has lost interest.
Right.
And that's exactly what it's designed to do, is keep your brain engaged, and feed you dopamine the whole time. And when you work the graveyard shift, you see a lot, especially in Louisiana, you see a lot of the old folks coming in on buses overnight from Houston regularly. Right. And you'll see those regulars and you get to know them.
It's exciting.
But man, when you see them setting up their little, like, the picture of their grandkids on the machine and setting up their tchotchkes and rubbing it and talking to it, it's like, holy shit, dude.
Makes you feel a little
like
worse
they may as well be sucking a fucking crack pipe, and I couldn't deal with that. I couldn't do it anymore. And that's why they start you off on graveyards, is at least if you can't do it anymore, it's not going to full on affect business like crazy, because
very well. They know they've thought of every angle. There's been a lot of high price psychologists brought in.
That to me was their litmus test of, okay, are you morally corrupt enough to sit here and take 80-year-old grandma's money all friggin' day long?
Well, look at the reality of the people. I mean, look what you've even seen recently in terms of like Vegas, like with Steve Wynn and what he's been into. And so I think that it's definitely true that you have to be of a certain
You have to be of a certain
ineptitude.
mentality.
Right. To be able to to
be able to be okay with that. It's one of those, how do you sleep at night on a huge pile of money? That's how I sleep at night. and like I said before the show,
people don't become filthy rich.
After my year of doing that, I'll go to the casino in Vegas last night, whatever. We have the thing that we go out and drink all night before we get on the plane, all that kind of stuff. It's great fun as a crew, all that. But I go out and I bring like $50-$60, man. I spend as much as a healthy bar tab, and I drink doubles all night. And I play like $2 roulette, and $100 is my limit. That's all I walk in with. If I win more than that, I'll gladly go to my hotel room and put that first $100 up and keep playing and drinking. But yeah, I don't keep going to the ATM. I go to the ATM once before I get there, and then I leave my card at home. I bring my credit card with me where I can't go get cash. I can only get food. Yeah.
Fee on those ATMs. The other thing too is like once you've surpassed your and I hate that I even know this. It's crazy that I've walked into a casino and not hit nothing but blackjack. But and so like once you hit up Adam ATM, and then if you need more money, like gosh, they charge just incredible like vig on it to use a sports betting term.
Yeah.
I mean, geez, bucks will charge you like $100. Like whoever came up with that is brilliant. Like that guy lives in the biggest mansion there ever. Hey, I know what we'll do. We'll like charge people $100 to take out a thought.
Yeah, exactly.
But so it's just every little angle is thought about town, and that's the thing people need to realize about Vegas is, they're not your friend. They're not there to help you. They're there to take you. And as long as you understand that, I think you can kind of like deal with the town a little more.
You can at least play on an equal level at that point. I'm of the fact of at least at that point you're an informed consumer. If you keep giving your money to the beast, that's your own problem now.
The idea of the guy who rolls into Vegas and thinks that he's going to like win a bunch of money, like didn't used to make me laugh out loud, but it makes me laugh out loud now.
Yeah.
Like, because just knowing what I know after years of research and, like especially the sports gamblers, like in the sports books, it's like they just think they're going to roll in there and their team's going to win and their shit doesn't stink and they have it all figured out.
There's only they're
gonna pay down a 12-team parlay for $5 and win $56,000. Those guys look pretty glum at the end of the day.
There is
12-team parlay doesn't.
And Doc Holliday would say it best. There's only poker is an honest profession. At least at poker, you're not playing the house. You're playing the table. You're playing the player at the table against you. But I'm here to tell you, I have a buddy of mine that expatted years ago and is living in Costa Rica. He comes back like every 3-4 years where it's under the radar that way, and he sees his mom because she came down with cancer, but he still lives there. He did off-track betting, sports betting, things like that, give him points figures. But whenever he first moved there, he was doing a ton of online poker. He was like, he would go out to gaming houses in Houston, late night games, all kinds of stuff, and played in a few tournaments in Louisiana, and got to a point where when he moved to Costa Rica, one of his first jobs was actively working for a casino, coming in to play other players. Yeah, that was his job, was to come in after a certain amount of time and sit down at the table.
And
be like, right? And then he'd get paid his money and he'd turn it over. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that thing exists. People have that job, like they will come in and bust you out. That's their job, and they turn it over to the casino and they get their weekly salary or whatever, And a lot of people don't understand that. People don't know that actively happens at casinos.
Right. Well, it's
because that's one of the only games that they can't control the odds on it. It's a player playing a player.
Right.
It's not the player playing the house or the player playing the odds.
Well, what my experience has taught me too is like if you actually know what you're doing in sports gambling, that's the other area where you can kind of clean them up. Mm-hmm. But you have to be really diligent in your research and disciplined, and only be laying maybe 2 or 3 bets that you're certain of. Yeah. But if you lay them right, and so I had an accident that they don't really take care of those people very well. You know, like when you see sports books, like high roller kind of sports gamblers, they don't roll out the red carpet for those guys and give them hotels and all this stuff, you know, because a sports gambler who knows what they're doing can actually take them pretty good. So that's one of the few areas, but you know, where you actually have a shot. But even there, you know, gosh, I would think 9 out of 10 people are ultimately going to be losing money in the long run. Yeah. You know?
And that's just it. You know, it's a pie-eyed dream. It's like people that play scratch-off tickets expecting to win it big, and then start spending hundreds of dollars a month. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I treat it as straight up a form of entertainment. I will go out and spend $60, same as I would at a good bar, you know, have a few scotches, things like that, you know, good amount of beer, and I'll just hang out all night and watch people play and, you know, talk.
Yeah. Mildred in there spending her Social Security with a picture of her grandkids on the slot
rubbing the machine. Like that is when my switch flipped. Literally, when I saw that, I was like, "Good Lord, have mercy, man! If my grandmother was alive, that could be her." Right, sitting there, spending what I know is her government check. You know, her Social Security check, her retirement check. No, they don't give a damn.
Like MGM Resorts, I think, is particularly sociopathic. I mean, they're the ones who sued the victims of the mass shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's talk about that for a second. Why it was interesting when they did that. Go into that some.
Okay, well, interestingly, and we have this in Vegas wrong. There was an attorney who was there that night, and she was one of the people who got injured. And so I talked with her extensively. She lives in San Diego, to kind of help me understand why they did that. Really bright lady. And she told me that, you know, it basically comes down to it helps minimize their losses. And they're not actually suing for any financial amount, but it takes it. And so they're basically doing it.
It's really like a preemptive measure to say, hey, man, that's some dude that stayed at our hotel. It's not our fault.
Right. But it's basically, as with most things, it's about themselves and helping themselves and minimizing their liability. But it's just, I mean, it certainly doesn't look good. Yeah. You know, you certainly lose the popular vote when you go after people who got shot.
And they were definitely one of many properties along the Strip that donated the absolute maximum of $30,000 to the good sheriff's reelection campaign.
Oh, well, see, the other thing you need to understand about that is, you know, in Vegas, the town where everybody butters each other's bread, like when they support a sheriff, when MGM Internet, like they give the campaign maximum, but then they call up their liquor vendor and that person gives the maximum. And then they call up their people who run their housekeeping services as maximum. And then they call up the food vendor and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And before you know, those 15 to 16 companies associated with MGM, MGM International Resorts, that's the biggest employer in the state of Nevada, the number one, thousands of employees. And so that's how it happens, you know, like it's not just the MGM International gives them that money, it's all the vendors that work with them. And so it's just and so one of the questions we ask in Vegas wrong, and we even went into it in my last documentary, What Happened in Vegas, is, you know, is Joe Lombardo lying to minimize their legal liability? You know,
I think there is no. I'm of the mind that there is no question about that. No question.
I think you're right. But the question is, one thing you wonder is when Joe Lombardo signed up to be a cop, do you think he imagined going down this slippery slope?
I don't
where
think
he would
so.
ultimately be
I
screwing
really
people over and searching the big money, or does someone like that get into it for the right reasons and then they kind of slowly sidetracked into being corrupt?
I think it's just that way. Much like I don't think anybody goes through life saying, you know what I'm going to be when I'm 40? I'm going to be an alcoholic.
Nobody.
Man, I can't wait. When I'm 40, I'm going to be a smack addict, man. It happens that your toes get dipped into it, and then before you know it, you're in too deep. I've been through that. I know people that have been through that, and I'm here to tell you, like I studied
in the casino.
I did. I went through it working as a teacher and seeing the backside of teacher stuff. Being a substitute teacher, being even a teacher at my church, being involved in youth ministry at my church for 10, 15 years, being a seminarian my first year in college and studying to be a Catholic priest. And going into youth ministry after that. It was one of those that you go into it with these great intentions, and some people along the line get embittered during their process of indoctrination, be it at IBM, be it in the seminary, be it being a police officer. The humdrum gets to you, and especially whenever you're someone like a police officer or a soldier or a priest, even, which, don't get me wrong, folks, I am not defending any pedophiles. Okay. I'm not. The statistics are, for every one pedophile priest, there are like thousands that are not. The same as female school teachers. You hear about 5 or 6 a year that are having sex with their male students who are like the age of 13 or 14. You still send your kids to school every day, all right? There are sick people in the world, and a sociopath is a sociopath, and they know how to hide being a fucking sociopath. Whether they be a police officer, whether they'll say it all the time. It happened right under my nose. I didn't even see it. I would never suspect it from that person, and that's the mark of a sociopath. And I do think that police get into it for the best of intentions. I do. I think that the harshness of the job, married with I think some utter disdain from the public. I think a lot of politics, because that's something that I experienced in my world, be it in the seminary, be it in the church, be it with teaching, be it even at the casino. The fact is there's a lot of politics going on there. And there's a lot of,
that because, my dad was a teacher.
Yeah.
And he was
the things that happen behind the doors. He worked
really hard at it.
It'll wear you down, man. It'll wear you down.
Yeah. Well, my dad told me a story about, he gave teaching he's a shop teacher, and he helped a kid build a sailboat after school. Oh man,
my favorite teacher.
But then he noticed that it wasn't about being a good teacher. It was about whoever's been there the longest. And he looked at these guys who had been there for 30 years but weren't doing much. And they were making double, triple what he was, and he just got tired of that, and he got out. And so I think even for a cop or
same as the beat cop, man, same as the beat cop, exactly.
Looking at, he's busting his butt on the streets. He's dealing with felons and criminals, and he's on it. And then he looks at a guy like Joe Lombardo who goes to his dinner and has his ass kissed and lies all day and ends up making hundreds of thousands a year and being a morally bankrupt politician. So it's like at a certain point,
why wouldn't you
go,
why wouldn't you?
I've been doing the right thing. I've been doing the right thing. That hasn't been working out. Joe Lombardo's been doing the wrong thing. That's clearly working out. Look at that Mercedes he's driving.
Yeah.
And so
like my spiritual director used to say, so how's that working out for you? How's that making the same decision over and over again in life working out for you? You know,
Right.
have you learned anything yet? Because you should be. And it's interesting. My wife and I recently started watching. We watched the first season of the A&E show 60 Days In. And I'm not sure. I know you're a television editor. Folks like us who worked in broadcast tend to kind of keep up with a few shows like that. But I'd wanted to watch it, and it was interesting because apparently there was like rampant corruption going on within the Clark County, Indiana public jail. So much so that like people were getting arrested to come get drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So the sheriff decided to put 6 people, like normal citizens, not even cops, normal citizens, into jail for 60 days to gather information, to observe the officers, observe the inmates, things like that. One of the women that went in was a Boston police officer for 21 years. When everything was over, they had like a follow-up episode where they had a chance to confront each other over like, yeah, dude, you did this stuff. Like none of these people that they were in the same pod with in county jail were in the same training class as them. So they did not know each other until they saw each other in the post episode where it was like, oh yeah, I remember you. You did this stupid shit. And this female officer started sharing her experience of, you know, growing up in group homes, things like that. And that's why she became a cop, was to help people. And these people are criminals, everything else, you know. And she went in, and afterward she quit her job. She was like, I can no longer subject people to that system. Simply because somebody says you blow 0.1 or 0.01 over the limit, now I have to put you in jail, and you're going to be in there for 60 days, and it's going to ruin your life, or you're going to get your ass beat, or you're going to come out with PTSD. She's like, I just can't do that anymore. It was like, wow, 21 years a cop, 21 years, devoted to her job, loved it. And that 60-day experience totally changed her paradigm, totally changed the way that she looked and viewed at the world.
Well, here's the thing. When you realize that the bad guy wins, that's a pivotal moment.
It is.
And, you know, and you saw what happened in Vegas. You know, Larry Burns was the good guy, and he lost. And Joe Lombardo is, in my mind, worse than any criminal he's ever arrested. He's a piece of garbage. He won. Because he's willing to protect the casinos that help him get elected. So when you realize that the bad guy wins, that's a big moment, and it changes people. And and it's sad, but it's the truth in this world. Sometimes, a lot of times, the bad guy wins.
I think it's interesting though, because we as a society, especially since the 50s, and as someone, you know, involved in television, involved in film, you can probably attest to this as well. Whenever you look at storylines, we have absolutely come to the point of the anti-hero. We have come to the point of cheering for the bad guy.
My first experience with that was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you know, with Jack Nicholson. He was the anti-hero. But how can you not love a guy who's like lobbying for the guys to watch the World Series? You know, so that was an interesting. They flipped the script. It's like this guy's in confinement because he did something bad or whatever, but you find yourself cheering for Jack, you know, and not the authority figure. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like Goodfellas. You know, movies like that are so ingrained in American, ingrained in American,
but I like him. Yeah.
So ingrained in American society and so popular that they based a cartoon part off of it, you know, on Animaniacs called Goodfeathers. You know, like that's how pervasive that concept is. And it's interesting that we as a society have come to that point. It used to be that you cheered for the guy in the white hat, you know? You had this clear definition of good and bad, and we didn't know the model of corporate greed to that pervasive extent. It didn't reach every single person that we knew. We didn't have the middle class or the middle class was much larger than it is now. The disparate difference in society economically has drawn us to different places. And I think that the Mandalay Bay shooting had a lot to do with that. It was, like you were saying earlier, the fact that it may have very well been the fact that this millionaire was just losing a lot of money to casinos and just what the hell.
Well, he went from being a billionaire to not a millionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
Anymore. And I'm pretty sure in the report I read, I believe he went from having well over $1 million, and I believe almost 2 million or slightly over 2 million. It's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So like all the way down to like, I think around 530,000.
Yeah.
So it sounds like things were going well for Paddock for a while, and then they weren't, and that he got angry and took revenge. And for some reason, Vegas
got depressed
Joe
and
Lombardo,
snapped.
Yeah. And Puppet Boy Joe Lombardo, and the people who run Vegas don't want you to know that, but that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah, because I mean, kudos to my former bassist and listener of the show, follower of the Dudes and Beer Facebook page, Michael Zappla. He has held that the entire time. He's like, this dude was in debt to casinos, man. Like he ruined his life friggin' gambling. You know, he's depressed. Like he just snapped. He just snapped under the pressure of debt.
I want to make it really clear. Like,
no.
As far as I'm concerned, Stephen Paddock doing what he did is just unfathomable.
Monster.
Like, I just can't. I can't conceive of wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But they're trying to hide the reason that he even did it.
Exactly.
And that I object to. Now, nobody's saying that this guy was anything other than a monster, but so are you guys. You know? Yeah. I mean, so are you guys.
I was a part. I was a cog in the machine, man. I came and served you your drinks. I made sure that you got a double. You know? And that's just it. The day that I saw that, I was like, oh man, I can't.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
listen, I got to get. I got to.
Absolutely.
It's been a fantastic talk. I got to get back to like cutting this thing, and I got a little dog here that get walked.
Let everybody know where they will be able to go to see Vegas Wrong whenever it comes out. Where they can go to
find our Facebook page on. If they look up Vegas Wrong on Facebook, that's where they can find our movie. Follow us for updates, and then if they want to check out my last film, What Happened in Vegas, that's available on Amazon, iTunes, Vimeo, and other places as well.
Okay. Fantastic. While you're online checking that out, make sure to check us out at dudesandbeer.com, everybody. Check out the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Also, make sure to check out our parent network, HC Universal Network, and all of our family of podcasts, from Talking Sound to Yes But Why, about improv comedy, to Scary Dad Podcast, Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano, all kinds of great content there. Go check it out. HCUniversalNetwork.com. Visit the Google Play Store and download the free app, and it is coming to iTunes soon. So please do hold the line for me real quick, Ramsey. And until next time, everybody, if you can't be good at it. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Podcast. To listen to our audio streams or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for Android and iDevices, available on Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors and other podcasts on this network, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.